to do a score, so please keep necessary distractions brief during the presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page and on our website, coeh.berkeley.edu. At this time, we're pleased to welcome our presenter. Kristina Spurgeon, MPH, has been in healthcare emergency management for 15 years. She is the emergency manager for UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento, a level 1 trauma and pediatric care specialty center. Her primary focus is on overall system readiness, specifically on training people with the tools they need to walk into any command center for any event ready to go. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm very excited to do this webinar with everybody. And to give a slight other bit of background, this presentation is focused on healthcare incident command, but the principles and the basics that are going to be outlined are adaptable and useful in any incident command situation. So my examples are coming from a healthcare and hospital specific perspective. And I will make sure to call out when it is that I'm being very hospital specific. I want to make sure that I understand there's a very wide audience here. And so I want to give everybody that's listening some tools that you could take back regardless of where it is that you work or where you might be standing up a command center. So let's get started. The learning objectives for today, we're going to outline and explain the incident command system, and that's the basic system as a whole. We want to describe the priority roles during a disaster response. And the reason why I'm going to focus on the priority roles is depending on which system or which redaction of the incident command system you're using, you're going to have different specialty roles that will be pre-placed or pre-populated in whatever particular incident command system you're using. So we're going to work and focus on the priority roles, which are common to regardless and common to every incident command system that all response agencies use. We're going to demonstrate the incident management process. And once again, this is common to any situation when you're using an incident command system. And we want to talk about where, how, and when staff and different teams fit into the command center structure. Just because there's a box on your org chart does not mean that it could be one person, it could be an entire team. And so we want to talk about how to incorporate teams that you would have already and how to create teams and put them into the organization. So in California, we typically think of ourselves as having 4 seasons: fire, flood, earthquake, riot. However, we're learning that perhaps fire season is not necessarily a season anymore. It's kind of all year round. So those of you who were working in response agencies or even just listening to the news or maybe even walking outside, in the fall and winter of last year in California, there was fire and smoke in the air all the time. So we're looking forward to maybe adding another season. Could it be drought? Maybe. What are we really worried about? What am I really worried about as a healthcare emergency manager? I worry about those things, but what about pandemic? Pandemic doesn't have a season either. So we might be faced with any one of those things plus a couple of things we hadn't really been focusing on. So what do we do about that? We want to think about where we are posited within our organizations for how we're going to respond. We are going to be part of a larger structure if there's a big natural or man-made event. And that can be a little bit disconcerting because ultimately all disasters really are local. You are going to work with a local agency when you are incorporated into a response structure or when you are a victim of, when your organization is a victim of a large disaster. So where does it start? It starts with your operational area. In California, that's your county most likely. There are a couple places in the state that have some consortiums that have bound together to have a bigger operational area, but generally it's a county. So that's your first place to go. For those of you that are in large cities, there is also a city structure that will report up into the operational area. So it depends on which jurisdiction you're in. And that's definitely something that you would want to know right off the bat. If your city or your county is standing up their structure, where they would like to plug you in. And then there's a state regional structure. California has 6 regions, and this is mainly for healthcare response, but sometimes they activate it for others when they need mutual aid. If your county gets overwhelmed, your operational area is overwhelmed, or your city, then, and you need to go outside of your locality to get more stuff, resources, people, equipment, ambulances, they're going to go to the regional structure. And so they'll ask for that first. And then if they have to, they will go all the way to the state operations center. So that's kind of how the basics work. But when you're communicating generally during an incident, if you have your command center stood up, you're going to be talking to your operational area, which will be your county or your city. And the regional structure or the operational area will communicate on your behalf up to the state operations center. So where do we plug in? We want to make sure that we are focusing on what we're going to be doing in our locality within our organization. Incident command system informs how we want to do that. So what are we going to do about that? If we need to plug in, what do we need? We need an emergency management program that has resilience and a foundation in a very realistic threat assessment and hazard vulnerability assessment. This is the foundation of the preparedness that you want to conduct with your organization before the big stuff happens. So, and when I say realistic threat assessment, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I really want to focus in on that with this presentation because we have a lot of, for those of you that are experienced emergency managers, you will find that as time goes by, our work is informed a lot by whatever people are currently worried about. Headline news has a big impact on our work. And so we want to make sure that we're looking in a realistic fashion about what we're actually going to be faced with. So how do we take that apart so that we can actually be a little bit more objective about it? First things first, continuity of operations plan. And so many of you may be familiar with an emergency operations plan, an EOP, or a business continuity plan and business impact analyses and strategies for mitigation and all of those different ways of doing it. When you look at an overarching method of a continuity of operations plan, that's the emergency management side plus business continuity. And you weave them together to look at both if you are going to be a response partner or a receiver like a hospital would of patients, or if you're part of the larger university structure that's going to have to maintain operations, you want to meld emergency management and business continuity together so that you can have those two things talk to each other and that your strategies for response and your strategies for recovery and your strategies for business continuity all talk fluidly across. The command center can be the way that you connect those in the midst of an incident, but looking at them ahead of time is a really good way to think about, okay, we've got business operations, we have research enterprise that we want to protect, we have patients that are not going to be suddenly leaving our hospital just because there's a flood. How do we continue our mission across all of that stuff? What are we going to have to respond to? So a lot of times you'll see that those two things are handled by different people, different teams, different parts of the organization. When you connect them together through a continuity of operations plan and program, it's not just a plan, it's also a program. When you weave them together beforehand, then you can have all of those resources and all of that analysis and all of those strategies at the ready for when you need to employ them. Training is absolutely key among all of those things. And training and practice and having exercises at whatever level, including 5-minute tabletops at department meetings, all of those things build trust capital and increase your credibility as emergency managers and business continuity experts so that when the stuff actually starts to happen, they can turn to you and say, hey, wait a minute, I remember you. You're the one that gave that really fast presentation a couple months ago at a department meeting that made me go, maybe I need to be worrying about this stuff. And just even that, having that little bit of name and face recognition when you walk into your command center with your leaders makes a huge difference for your organization and your ability to respond. So when we start to look at what is it that we're trying to do, we want to think about what is it that we're worried about? What is it that's impacted our organization? What have we experienced in the past? What keeps us up at night? When I say the word disaster, every single one of us has something that comes immediately to mind. So, and those things are all going to be different. And so when we look at our emergency operations plan, our business continuity plan, and weaving them together into a continuity of operations plan, this is where we want to get realistic about our threat assessment and our hazard vulnerability assessment. So the easiest place to start with that is what we've had experienced in the past. So here's a couple of events over the last 10 years or so that have really impacted my organization and the different organizations that I've worked with. Some of them are healthcare focused, Ebola, measles, Zika. Some of them are not. Some of them had impacts across many different jurisdictions. And, you know, as I was going through thinking about all of the recent experiences, the wildfires that started in July, and really technically before that, and went all the way through December of 2018, had huge impacts across the state of California. It was the worst fire season ever. It was the most deadliest. It was the most destructive. And it was all over the state. And so when we think about that, there's lessons learned from those very recent experiences that can be harnessed and used as a reminder, because it's still current in people's brains. And so they make it more salient and more relevant for people when you're trying to say, hey, I need your time, I need your attention, I need your thoughts on what we went through last year, because we're probably going to go through this or something similar again. And by the way, here's how our lessons learned from all of those events can be utilized in the next situation, which we don't know what the scenario is going to be. So, and you know, for my organization, we haven't experienced fires yet this year, and everybody's knocking on wood, I can hear you. We're experiencing internal floods. And these are, you know, not floods outside. These are located to our organization in our basement. And so we're dealing with those issues, and they're having very different impacts, but we're still using our command system and our incident command structure in order to respond to those. So very different from fires, although you're seeing a lot of the same people as our organization stands up a similar command structure in order to respond to those events. So what do we do with these experiences? We want to make an assessment. What happened in the past? We have our list of events. We have our list of, you know, what we thought about it. We have our feelings. We have our experiences. And we want to take those, well, what's likely to happen in the future? Just because we, you know, one area burned doesn't mean either that area is not going to burn again or something adjacent to it or similar. And, you know, the fire doesn't even have to be nearby. You can have wildfire smoke impacting the air quality hundreds of miles away from where the fire is, as many of us experienced last year. So we can look at that and say, this is very likely to happen again. It's very likely to have a long range impact, just like a pandemic is always on the horizon, whether or not, you know, depending on how recent the last one is. And we see our infectious disease colleagues and infection prevention people remind us that the longer we go without a pandemic, the more likely the next one is. It's the same thing with earthquakes. So the longer we go without the big one, the probability of that big one happening keeps increasing. So how do we take what we've learned in the past, apply it to the future? The question is, how is it going to affect us? What are the impacts going to be? So if we have those similar or same or different experiences, what's it going to do? Is it going to cause a media storm? Are we going to have media attention because XYZ thing is happening on our campus or near our campus? Or is it going to be something where we are going to be part of the response, like as a healthcare system? So what are those impacts? And this is a very engaging and yet difficult conversation to have with your leadership and with the people that are going to be staffing your command center, because you literally have to play the what if game. Okay, what if this happens? What if that happens? The more important question is getting to, how is it going to impact us and what are the effects going to be? And so that's how you start that conversation. And so when you are ready to engage your people, that's the first thing you want to bring to them and ask them, what are they worried about? What keeps them up at night? What are the experiences that they've had in the past that have impacts that they learned from that they might want to apply to future situations? So the first question when you get those people together is you ask them, how do we know something has happened? And how do we know that that something is not just a glitch or a problem, but could cause a full-blown disaster for our facility, which might require us to open our command center? So when I have these conversations, I like to give them an example. What's really going on? Say you come to work, you see a puddle outside in the parking lot. Could be raining, could be summer, could be any time. Puddle, parking lot. What does that mean? Well, it could mean a couple of things. It could mean that there's a broken sprinkler, fire sprinkler, landscape sprinkler. You don't know, you just know there's a puddle, right? What if it's actually a broken fire sprinkler in your basement, something that we've gone through a couple of times? So this puddle actually has made a bigger impact than we thought, and we've actually got an actual flood going on. Well, that's a little bit bigger than we thought. It's not just something that's going to be happening outside that we can contain, fix, and move on. We're going to have to mitigate and remediate the effects of whatever damage the water has done. So that's a little bit bigger. What if we have to turn the water off? What if you're a hospital? You have to turn the water off in order to actually fix the problem. How do you communicate that out? So we can see that this puddle that we first saw upon getting to work in the morning has turned into something that's way bigger than we thought. Turning the water off to any hospital or even a business building can have huge operational impacts that can be long-ranging and last for longer than when you just had the water off. So the question is, what do you think? And here's where we're moving into our assessment piece. What really happened here? What's going on? And when you're having these discussions with your leaders or your staff or your teams, you want to give them room to think about that. What is this really going to do to us? What if it really is just a broken landscaping sprinkler out in the parking lot? What if we lose that parking lot for a couple of days? These are all questions that are going to have impacts that are a little bit bigger than you think. And so in this example, I like to share with everyone, there's actually only 2 disaster constants. And those 2 constants are, and this happens every single time, it is bigger than you think. It's going to be bigger than what it looks like on first sight. And that's true for everybody. And the second one is, if you don't tell them, they're going to make it up. So in your assessment process, which is always the first thing you're going to want to do, you want to try to get a handle on both of those things. Let's dive as deep as we need to in understanding what's really going on here and how we're impacted. And we want to get the real story out so that people understand, because it becomes very difficult very quickly to understand what happened versus what people think happened. And it's very difficult to tease out once those conclusions, whether they are accurate or not, have been drawn, and to go back and rewind and say, hold on a minute, that wasn't real. This was something that somebody saw on the news a while ago, and that's not what really happened. So you want to get a handle on that first. So, and then the next question, once we've had a little bit of time to talk about, oh, wait a minute, is this a really big thing? Is this not such a big thing? What are the impacts? You know, which departments are involved? Is this a system-wide thing? Do we need to bring this to a higher level? When you have your event, you spend some time doing that. Wait, what happened? How big is it? And 3 first questions that really help that conversation be directed. Is it safe? Are we safe? Are our buildings safe? Are our patients safe? Are our students safe? Are all of the people that could be involved in this building safe? Yes, okay, well, are we being effective? Is this thing gonna really interrupt business? You know, if we lose the parking lot for 2 days, how effective and efficient is that? We've got to develop some other strategies. So if we have a hesitation to safety, effectiveness, or efficiency, if we have any question about that, and the answer is no or maybe, then we say, wait, can we use daily operations to solve this problem? Daily operations are a modified version of daily operations. Sometimes we really just need to get a group of people together, look at something in depth and very seriously, figure out how to slightly modify daily operations, and then move on to solve the problem. If the answer to all of these questions is it's bigger than we thought, or we're not sure we're safe, we're definitely not being efficient, I'm not really fully understanding what's going on here, and I'm not sure if daily operations can address this, open your command center. Even if it's just to really fully have this discussion. Get the people in the room or on the phone and take your time to really walk down what is it that's impacting us, how is it impacting us. So once the decision has been made to open the command center, even if it's just to investigate what it is that you're really impacted and how you're impacted by it, we want to start somewhere at the very beginning. So the first steps when you open your command center, and these principles work whether you're gathering everybody on the phone or in person, because sometimes in our new mobile and internet-based world, it is very possible to run a full-blown command center over an online meeting place or through various command center software tools that different organizations have. The command center is open doesn't necessarily mean you're all gathered in a room. Sometimes, if it's that serious, you really do need to get together face-to-face, because there's nothing that can replace a face-to-face conversation with another human being, especially if that human is not sure of what's happened and not sure what their role is going to be, and they might be somebody who might be on the hook to make some pretty big decisions. So those are some of the choices that you're going to want to make within your organization. How are we activating? So when you've decided to open your command center, it actually becomes a little bit more directing of your operations when, how do you tell people that your command center is open? Do you have a mass notification system? Do you have a group text? Do you send it out via email? Do you walk into the office next door and just go corral all of the people and say, hey team, we need to gather in person. Because one of the first things you want to look around and check out who's there and ask, do we have everybody we need to have this conversation fully? So how you found out, did we forget to tell somebody? Were they not on our group text that we already had going for a different reason? So you want to make sure that you're looking at that. And people may not be able to join in person if you need a large group of people. And so you may have that conglomeration of some people in a room, some people on the phone, some people on a webinar. So when you first join the command center, you're going to see a variety of responses depending on what your organization is, what your mission is, if your mission has changed, if you have something that you're trying to urgently fix, if you've got a slow-moving pandemic maybe going like we had during H1N1 10 years ago. And so you've got varying levels of people who are dealing with different information sources, different levels of validity, truth versus not truth. We don't know right now, but it can be very chaotic when you first join a command center. And that's just par for the course. If you're the emergency manager for your organization, your job is to walk in and go, okay guys, we got this. Let's start at the beginning. And we're going to go through that in a little bit more in depth, a couple of slides here ahead. How do you even do that, right? Because that's kind of a big deal. But when you join the command center, even if you're not the emergency manager, and you notice that there's a lot of chaos, you might want to say, hey guys, there's another way to do this. Hold on a second. There's a couple of key questions. So, but before we can get to that point, you've got a new job. And so we've got Captain America's shield up there. And the joke that goes along with that one is when Steve Rogers gets notification that he has to go be Cap, he's going to bring his shield forward and he doesn't get to be Steve Rogers until that job is done. And that's a very important point for all of us to remember. If we're involved in incident response, it's very hard to keep going with your day job. And sometimes you have to delegate that work off to somebody else. If you've been given the ops chief job or the planning chief job, and you're going to be running briefings 2 and 3 times a day, 24/7 for the next, who knows for how long, then you want to have a different conversation with your team and with your boss to let them know, I'm involved in this incident. I may not be able to get my daily work done. And that's an important conversation that often gets overlooked. And so you're going to bring the shield down and you're going to put on that vest. And it really is a good idea to wear the vest if you're in a command center. They are a fabulous communication tool because when you walk in, you know who's doing what. Even if it's just the colors, it's very helpful to have those on. But when you put on that vest, you've got your shield in front of you, you're going to run that until it's done. And so that's the conversation that really is very helpful for you to have. And also, the other thing you're going to want to be thinking about is, if I really am going to be here for a couple of days, I need a deputy, somebody who can take this over in the next 12 hours when I get completely exhausted and need to have a backup to do this work. So those are some of those things that you want to be thinking about at the very beginning. So, sorry boss, this report is not going to be done at 5 o'clock today, and I don't even know about tomorrow. So good luck to everybody with that. I know it's never easy, but disaster is disaster, and here we go. So, primary thing that some of you may need to say, I need an incident commander. I am not the incident commander. A lot of times when whoever it is that finds the thing, who first notices there's a problem, who first understands that there's an issue going on, that person gets tagged with being the incident commander because they're the first ones to bring it to everybody's attention. That's fine in the first couple of moments, but once you've notified everybody and you've gotten other people involved, you can say, you know what, I'm really going to have to do a different role. We need so-and-so who's in the right leadership role, who has the right authority to do this work. So keep that in mind too, that one of the greatest things that you can do for your organization is to say, this is not the best place for me. I can help you out as a technical expert. I can be somebody who can help with some of the operation stuff, but I am not the best person to be your incident commander. So keep that in mind too. A lot of people get tagged with that and they're not ready for it, and that is totally okay, because you can still have a role and you can still be a very important responder in this event. So we're going to take some time to go through those priority roles that I mentioned at the beginning. We're not going to spend very much time in the details and the weeds of what a different organization chart can look like, although I'm going to show you an example later on of how one can be tailored. These are the priority roles that are common to every single incident command system, regardless of who it is that, or what organization is using it. So the incident commander, we're going to, of course, start at the top and go from there. The incident commander is the person who is in charge. And the first thing that the incident commander needs to do is delegate. They need to delegate somebody else to answer the phone. They need to delegate somebody else to take notes, and let them have a little bit of space, some breathing room. Give yourself the gift of being able to think. Your job is to be in charge. The public information officer is somebody who's going to be sharing information outside the organization. A good way to conduct being a public information officer is to have two of them. Somebody who can talk outside the organization and speak for the organization to outside audiences like the media, and somebody who is going to be an inward-facing PIO. So somebody who's going to be writing the communications to staff, to the students, to the patients, to the visitors, because that's a very different job and it's a very different audience. So when you can, and you have the opportunity to have two of them, it's best if they're from the same team so that they can do that job in concert. But it's always very, a much more structured way to do that, because those two audiences, internal and external, are very different. Your safety officer is somebody who literally has the ability to say, nope, time out. We are not going to wade into the flooded basement to turn off the electrical system, guys. That's not safe. We need a different plan. So the safety officer is somebody who usually every organization has one in name or in function. And so that person needs to sit side by side with the incident commander, review all of the plans, and make sure that we're doing the right thing. The next one is the liaison officer. This is somebody who, unlike the public information officer, the liaison officer is responsible for having a dialogue with those other partner agencies that you're going to be responding with. And a lot of times it's really effective to trade liaison officers with those other organizations and have them sit in your command center and send your liaison to their command center. Then they've got eyes, they're literally boots on the ground, eyes on, communication device at the ready to say, this is what's going on over here, and you can trade back and forth. Otherwise, it might just be somebody who is escorting the regulators around when they're there to help you reoccupy something if you've had to evacuate a building or change your operations somehow. So the liaison officer is somebody who is in charge of having a dialogue with those other partner agencies. Specialists are anybody who doesn't happen to already have a job or a specific function in the rest of your org chart. And you can really put them anywhere. They don't have to report to the incident commander. In our organization, we have specialists reporting in the operations side and sometimes occasionally in logistics or planning as well. So these are your technical people who have the expertise that you need to respond to whatever particular incident it is. And usually you need to have those people added onto your org chart once you understand what your situation is that you're trying to respond to. The command center coordinator is usually your emergency manager. This is the person who's going to go into the building, turn the lights on, set the phones up, get all the stuff out, and then switch over and act as an emergency management advisor, somewhat like a specialist. Help the incident commander design the org chart, help them understand, what these resources are, remind them of the last exercise or event that we've had. So command center coordinator can have a couple of roles. So those are the top sections. That's called the command staff. Let's go look at what the other four different groups are going to be doing in those color boxes underneath. So operations, planning, logistics, and finance. Sometimes people spell them another way so that it spells flop. Well, flop doesn't sound very motivating, so I like to do it in this order. So how are we going to remember who's doing what? There's a key to that. So I know that J.K. Rowling probably didn't have any expertise before she told us all about the wonderful world of Hogwarts, but here's a really good way to think about this. If you're operations, you're probably in Gryffindor. Why is that? Because operations are the people that are out there doing stuff. They're the ones that are probably going to be most visible. They're out there fixing it. They're the ones who are making the actions happen and they're getting it done. Planning, the Ravenclaw team. We need our brightest brains who can sit there in the command center and do the assessment piece. Okay, guys, what happened? Why? How do you know that's true? What does our history tell us about what we've done in the past to deal with these? We want our Ravenclaws in planning to remember and keep it going, because we have some very serious tasks that planning has to do that are very different from the other three groups. You guys can see where this is going. Notice that the colors are lining up, by the way, which I thought was very cool. Logistics, the long-suffering Hufflepuffs. We couldn't do anything in anywhere if we didn't have Hufflepuff support, and that's what logistics does. They're supporting the operation by making sure that we have the stuff, the staff, the space, the internet connectivity. IT goes in logistics most of the time, unless we're talking about some giant cyber event. where IT is going to be in operations, but we want our Hufflepuff IT people there to help make sure that we can all connect all of our devices because we're probably going to need them during the event. And of course, Slytherin has all the money in our finance section. So if you're not a Harry Potter person, here's another way to remember it. Command staff, you guys are going to lead. You're in charge. You're going to make decisions and you're going to communicate with the response partners. Operations, you're the doers. You're going to put the plan into action. Planning, you're our thinkers. And some would argue that you guys have the biggest role because you have to be responsible for all of the information and figuring out what we're going to do about it. So gather and think and develop and maintain the incident action plan. Logistics, you're going to get the stuff, space, staff, support, whatever it is that the operation needs to keep going. And finance, you're going to pay, monitor all the incident related costs. There's going to be a lot of paperwork afterward and all of those things. So I'm going to show you guys now an example of how that comes into play. This is a kind of a sample. This is very hospital focused. This is kind of like how we do it in my organization. And we've got a lot of different teams that come online. So every single one of these boxes really does represent a team. Very rarely do we just have one person doing each one of these things. The exception generally is the incident commander. That tends to be a sole person within our organization, although not always. There are other organizations out there that use joint, 2 or 3 different incident commanders depending on what the situation is. So right away, those of you who are incident command old school, you'll notice that we have 2 operations branches on our org chart. That's absolutely very intentional. We ran into span of control with one person overseeing all of the operational things that needed to be done. And so we split it into 2 branches. And the group on the left is basically medical care and everything that has to do with patient care. The second group, the hospital operations part, is how do we keep the hospital running in the middle of all of these challenges? And so including environmental services, who's going to clean? The people reporting to hospital operations. And this also does reflect a little bit more of how our day-to-day operations are focused as well. So we spent some time looking at our daily org chart and how it makes the most sense for people to be reorganized into a command center that could cover every aspect of what our mission is so that we make sure that we have all of these boxes covered. And this is flexible. This is just a template. When we activate our command center to address the incident, once we understand what the incident is, we move people around. Some of them go up and report to the incident commander directly. Some of them aren't activated because we don't need that group. So we take a look at this, we say yes, no, move this person here, and then we redraw the org chart. And that can be a little bit of a tricky thing. Who's going to redraw the org chart? Your planning chief should be redrawing the org chart. So that's one of their tasks, is to help. If it's not your emergency manager or command center coordinator, your planning chief needs to help your incident commander design the org chart that he or she needs to respond to the incident that we have. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, because how can we know what the incident is if we haven't had a first assessment with those big questions? So when you have the understanding something's happened, we want to start here. We're going to do Incident Management 101. The first thing you have to do is assess the situation. Some of you are familiar with the planning P. This is basically another way to look at the planning P. You have to start with what happened. How big is it? Who's impacted? How are they impacted? How do we know that, by the way? And we always want to keep a handle on what are our information sources, because a lot of times I hear about incidents over Facebook. Seriously, I hear about stuff over Facebook. And for a long time, I wasn't even on Facebook. And so what do we know about Facebook? It's generally blown out of control, and it's already been made into a bigger deal than it really is. But 9 times out of 10, I found that there's a kernel of truth somewhere in there. Something did happen. It may not be what it first looks like, but how do we get to the bottom of that? We want to ask these questions. What are the risks to the organization? How long do you think this is going to last? Are we talking about a 4-hour thing, a 2-hour thing, or a 2-week thing? And a lot of times we find that with disaster constant number 1, it's bigger than you think. It's going to last longer than we first anticipated. That's very common. Who's here and who's not here? If we take a look around at our command center, online or in the room, who are we missing? Who else do we need to get involved? And who else are we communicating with? Do we need to talk to our operational area? Do we need to trade liaisons with them? Do we need to talk to our leadership higher up in our organization? Do we want to talk about, what are our fire and police response partners doing? Are they involved? How are we communicating with them? And all of those things become very relevant. We want to ask those questions first. And if you spend enough time here, it becomes pretty obvious what is it that we need to do. So once we've had that assessment, what's happened and how has it impacted us, the next thing we need to do is make a plan. What are we going to do about it? And remember, that's the important piece about, we're talking about not what happened, how has it impacted us? That's more important, because once we fully understand the impacts to our organization, it becomes very easy to say, oh, well, we need to do this. And we need to do this first before we do this other thing. So if you're finding in your command center that it's not clear what it is that you need to do first, you probably need to go back to those questions and go back to, okay, wait, what happened? How has it impacted us? Who else is not here? Because once you've fully spent time in that, what you need to do about it should be pretty obvious. So even if there's 200 things that we need to do, what we need to do first should really rise to the top when we talk about the impacts. And sometimes the emergency manager or the planning chief, sometimes they're the same person, needs to remember to bring that conversation back home. What are we going to do first, guys? And because we all need to act together as a team. And we're going to have different groups that are going to go out and do different tasks. At first, they're going to be assigned, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide. But if we've got, sometimes you'll find that there are people who will say, nope, we need to do this, and I'm going to go out and do that thing, and you can't stop me. And you're going to find that in pretty much every response. And we need to bring everybody back together to say, hold on a minute, is that a priority right now? Is that what we really need to be addressing? So sometimes we need to be prepared to have those conversations as well. And sometimes you'll also find that once you make that plan, which is an incident action plan and has objectives, which are prioritized, we're going to do this thing first. We're going to do this thing second. We're going to do this thing third once numbers 1 and 2 are done, because we can't do number 3 without 1 and 2. And we need to communicate that plan out. And how are we going to do that? A lot of times it's by email. It might be in your command center software management tool. It might be a one-liner text. It might be, so if we take an earthquake as an example, if you experience an earthquake, there's really 2 things that you need to figure out first. Can we stay in this building? And who's here? If we don't know the answer to those 2 things, especially if the answer to number 1 is we cannot stay in this building, we need to evacuate, then we really need to find out who's here. And there's not a whole lot you can do under an earthquake scenario until you've answered those 2 questions. So we need to share that plan out. Okay, guys, we're going to evacuate the building because we've determined that it's not safe to be here. We have a plan to do that. Here's who's doing it. We're going to use our building emergency response team, our BERT protocol, and the BERT captain is going to go around, and the floor wardens, and they're going to do all that stuff just like we've practiced for. So, and that's the plan. And we need to share that plan out. Sometimes you're going to have a written document. Preferably, you're going to have a written document of an incident action plan. Sometimes you just have to move fast and get it done. Write it down afterward, please. So, and preferably you're going to have a little bit more time. So here's the full, this is what I use when I am in the middle of a command center and when I'm teaching how to be in the middle of a command center. This really is incident management, top to bottom. So for those of you that have seen the planning P, it's very, very similar. I wanted to give everybody a little bit less graphically based way to think about this. And it's step 1, step 2, step 3. So we start, we're going to assess the situation. Planning is going to lead that. So your planning chief wants to start with those questions. What happened? How big is it? Who's impacted? How are we communicating? And the planning chief can drive that question or that discussion session. And planning chief hopefully has a deputy to help with taking notes and all that stuff too, because the next thing you're going to do is take all that information in your assessment and you're going to write it down into objectives. This is what we need to do about it. Planning is going to lead that process also. And those objectives, when you have that plan, are going to have assignments. This team is doing this, this person is doing that. They're going to need these resources. We're going to track all of these things. And then we're going to share that plan. Hopefully it's a document. Sometimes it's a bunch of scribbling on the big whiteboard paper or on your incident command wall, your incident command center walls. And it's a really good idea to put names and team names next to it as to who's doing what so that you can track and check back on it later. So share that plan. I've had a couple of examples where we have a whiteboard with the plan written on it, and we take a picture of that whiteboard and we text it to different people. This is our plan. This is what we're doing. I'm scrambling later to give you a Word document with our incident action plan, but right now this is what everybody needs to know. So once that plan has been shared, those people that have been assigned those objectives are going to figure out how to do that stuff. Then you're number 5, you're going to go do it. You need to keep safety at the forefront of all of these things. Safety cannot be assumed in a disaster situation. The parameters in the environment has changed. So we need to take some time, check in about safety, and keep checking in about safety, especially after big natural disasters where new hazards are created. You know, what's going on with the hurricanes right now. There's got to be a huge level of safety assessment before they can do anything else. Don't become part of the problem. So remember that, keep that up front. Go do it, be safe. And that's generally operations is going to be, as the doers, our Gryffindor team is going to go out there and do that stuff. But sometimes other sections or other teams get assigned objectives. And so everyone's going to be a part of that. And then once we've had some time, predetermined preferably, to go and do stuff, we're going to reconvene the team. Get back together in your command center or back on the phone. Schedule and hold that briefing, because while everybody else, all the Gryffindors and operations people are out doing the work, planning has started on the next round. Because yeah, we identified 200 things that need to be done. We assigned the first 5. Planning's working on 6 through however many else we're going to do next. And so you reconvene the team back together, you hold that briefing, you report on your current objectives. How did it go? Did we get it done? Great, here's your next objective. If we didn't get it done, why didn't we get it done? Did we need more time? Did we need more people? Did we need some kind of equipment or some more information that we didn't have available to us in order to get that thing done? Okay, here's your thing. Planning puts that back together to say, here's our next our next incident action plan for the next operational period. And we go and do that. So you may not conclude all of your objectives in the first one and you have to carry some of them over. That's totally fine. You can also have different tasks that have different due dates or due times, because sometimes it's going to take a team longer to do something. So, but planning is basically going to keep going through their process. Assess, make the plan, review the progress, understand why we didn't get something done, understand what progress was made. You add or modify those objectives as needed. You share that new plan with whatever strategy worked before, and you'll notice that there are so many people come up with all kinds of solutions to problems in the middle when they're allowed to think creatively in the middle of a disaster to try to solve a problem that they didn't know they were going to be faced with. And so people come up with some pretty slick solutions to some pretty difficult problems in the middle of these. And you keep doing those things. You continue to modify your strategies, or, you know, deactivate that particular team or this particular thing until you're done. How do you know you're done? When the answer is, can we go back to daily operations, or do we still need to have modified operations? Do we still need our command center open in order to continue to respond to this event? And one of the things that your planning chief is really going to want to do at the very beginning is, okay, guys, what are the triggers for turning this thing off? Because we want to get back to daily operations as soon as we can. That's the way that our organization is formulated, and it's the way that we respond to things the best. And we want to get back to daily ops as soon as possible. Once all of the impacts, the severe impacts, or the safety and efficiency and effectiveness have been reassumed, we want to turn the command center off and go back to daily ops. You may have somebody who is going to keep monitoring or maintaining some form of command center, because you do have 1 or 2 things that are lingering on. A lot of times you'll find that finance is involved with that. We have a flood in the basement, and we spent a lot of money to fix that flood, and we need to submit an insurance claim and a report to various and sundry activities and audiences. So we want to make sure that we've got our finance people engaged. We don't have our command center open anymore, for example, but those teams are going to keep going with the planning person who is in charge of making sure that we have that after action report developed until we reach the very end, including the debrief. And a lot of times people want to keep their command center open to do a debrief, or to at least make sure that everybody who's been affected understands we're going to debrief this incident on X day. And sometimes that's the last communication that goes out right before you close your command center. So that basically you can see your incident management progress throughout this. step 1 through 9, and at the very end, you're assessing, making a plan, doing the plan, assessing the plan, making the plan, doing the plan. And so that's how the incident command is. Its very basic form that we can break it down. Some of you, I'm assuming, are going, oh my gosh, really? It's never been that easy in my organization. And so yeah, your mileage may vary. And it also depends on whether or not your mission is something that can be interrupted. Not every mission can. And if it can be interrupted, then the focus turns on recovery. How do we get back to daily operations so that we can restart? And, you know, definitely give your planning chief all of the props that you can possibly give them. Volunteer to be your planning chief. It really is an interesting job. And you really do change the nature of your incident when you have a well practiced and knowledgeable planning chief who can bring that team together and really get a lot of this work done. So I would love to hear from anybody who's got questions. If you want to contact me, that's my information. And I'll turn it back over to the moderator to see if there's any questions anybody wants to ask.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation today. At this time, if you guys have any questions, please do use that webinar chat function. There's also a question and answer Q&A box that you can enter questions into there as well. And as we're waiting for people to go ahead and enter in some of their questions, perhaps you could give us an example of some of the biggest lessons you've learned in your role as you're with a specific incident. So for example, maybe like the Oroville Dam incident, what was a big takeaway? Or you can choose a different incident if you'd prefer.
Sure. So there's actually an analogy that I like to use as an example from Hurricane Katrina, actually, which I was not a responder to. I was an avid watcher of news during the time. But one of the things that's sort of not really well understood is that the state of Mississippi was as impacted, if not more impacted, by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita than the state of Louisiana was. But on the news, we heard almost exclusively about Louisiana and the city of New Orleans and what was going on there. And when you look back at that incident and you say, why didn't we really hear that much about Mississippi? And the answer turns out to be that the state of Mississippi had a very robust command structure at the state level. They had a team and they had an A team and a B team, and the people that were on those teams 24/7 to man their command center and the state command center. What they did was that they developed an incident action plan with some very direct objectives that said, we are doing this, we are doing this, and we are doing this, and we're doing it in this order. And when something exciting happened that got a lot of media attention that wanted to redirect their objectives, the state of Mississippi said, nope, we have our plan. We will put that problem in line and we will weigh it against our other prioritized objectives, but this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. And the other thing they did was at the very beginning was that they said, this is when we're going to, when we reach this state, when we get to these points, we're going to turn the state command center off and redirect back to whoever still needs help or the local jurisdictions, and we will deactivate and downgrade our operations to get it back into the hands of the locals. And that's exactly what they did. And so because they followed their plan and because they would not be distracted by whatever look at me, look at me, look at me incident was going on in the moment, they were able to really follow their plan, enact their plan, turn it off and go home. And the difference was that the state of Louisiana, with all of the worldwide attention that they were getting, had much more difficulty with continuing to not have their priorities redirected for them. So that's an example to think about. And so in an incident that I was involved in, I actually put a sign up on our command center. I told that story to everybody who would listen to me. And I put a sign up in the command center that said, we are Mississippi, not Louisiana. Ask Kristina for details. And so we had a lot of discussion about that.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have another question that came in as well. Can someone move from logistics to planning if needed?
Absolutely. So if you're somebody who's been trained up in any one of those positions and you need to move over, sometimes there are incident command systems that that put planning and logistics together and just have a combined section and have one person running the whole team. So that's entirely possible to do as well. And you can have somebody who wants to move over or try a new position. It's always a good idea to in a drill or in a real event, if you're willing, if you're brave, to in a real event, move over to a place that you haven't occupied before, a new chair, a new vest, because you'll bring all of your experience from those other positions and those other sections into place when you move over into a new role. And that's always a very good way to have a much more robust command structure, so that you have all those people who are dual trained or who have experience in multiple roles.
Great, thank you. And that also brings up another question. Do you have any suggestions for people who are looking to get more involved with their command system, if it's an existing organization or for starting their own, maybe for a smaller organization that might not have as thorough of a command center? And how to,
Sure.
I
So
guess, have a conversation with management about setting that up or getting permission to carve time out to participate.
right, that can be a really challenging question. So if your organization has an emergency manager and you want to be more involved, go directly to that person. We're always looking for new people who want to become involved. And there's generally some kind of incident command training that's regularly scheduled or happens, periodically throughout the year, and then exercises. So one way to get involved is to volunteer for whatever role that the emergency manager may need you for in your next exercise. So sometimes people come in and they just be observers, and they take notes and they help evaluate the exercise and say, hey, this is what I saw. And, you're making contact with your emergency management team and can become involved that way. If you're part of a smaller group and you don't necessarily have a large emergency management program, then you can become involved outside of your employment, outside of your university, outside of your situation. You can go to learn about CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Team. So most jurisdictions in California have one. They're usually run through the sheriff's office, and you can become involved in that group and become part of a response team that would happen for something that a local disaster, say. And there's a couple of classes that you would take, and you become a first responder for your local area where you live or work. And so those are two key ways to get involved.
Great, thank you for those suggestions. We do have also a comment. Someone wanted to highlight that there are some free FEMA training classes as well. Also a comment, thank you for categorizing. They loved the categorization of all of us into Hogwarts schoolhouses. Good memory tool.
Yes.
And then we also had a question regarding mass casualties. And I'm not sure if this is something that you might be able to comment on or not, but for example, how Santa Clara handled the Gilroy shootings.
So in any kind of situation like that with mass casualty where there's a crime scene involved, there are multiple organizations that are part of the first response. And so with the Santa Clara situation down in Gilroy, I don't have any personal insights into that, but one of the things that happened was, and it happens in any mass shooting or any mass casualty, is you have to determine where all of those injured people are going to go. So you definitely do not want to send them all to one hospital. And so generally speaking, emergency medical services, or EMS, is going to have what they call patient destination. So they're not going to overwhelm one hospital. They're going to triage them in the field, determine who is the most critical, and send those patients to the hospitals that have the highest level of service, like the level 1, level 2 trauma centers. And then everybody else, they're going to send those to the other hospitals so that they can try to get them distributed across the operational area, including to all of Santa Clara County and all of the hospitals. I think there's 11 or 12 hospitals in Santa Clara. And so they want to make sure that they're not overwhelming. And at the same time, they're also going to consider keeping families together if they can. So they want to send those people, and you may see, several people transported in one ambulance to one hospital together so that they can keep those families together. And then the family reunification piece becomes even more challenging afterward, to try to figure out, well, where did my person go? Where is my child? Where is my parent? And so there are other organizations that stand up as part of that to address those questions as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. I do have a couple other comments. Someone wanted to say thank you so much for the very informative presentation. And then also someone noted that going back to daily operations may not necessarily mean going back to previous operations. Your daily operations may include a new normal.
Thank you for the reminder, Amish. I see that on there, and you're absolutely right. We may not get to go back to daily operations. You know, the world is never going to be the same after Katrina or 9/11. We all have to take our shoes off when we get on an airplane now, which we didn't have to do before. So yes, new normal, and that's another trigger. How do you know that you've reached new normal and you can't go back? So another very important discussion that your planning chief may end up leading.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We do have a couple more minutes. If anybody does have another question, feel free to enter it in now. And while I'm waiting to see if there's any more questions, I just want to say thank you so much to our presenter and to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. We host webinars every first Wednesday of the month from 12 to 1 Pacific. We've also launched an ergonomics webinar series specifically with the NIOSH education and research centers throughout the country, and these webinars are on the third Wednesday of each month. We did get another question here. When dealing with situations at airports, is the diagram similar or would you change it?
It depends on what your situation looks like. So the top diagrams that I showed with the basic structures are probably going to be the same. Where it gets different is especially in the operations section and how you want to bring in those different teams. And planning, logistics, and finance may look very similar to what I showed you from our detailed org chart, but operations would certainly be very different. And you would also have different liaison structures at airports depending on whether you have the local fire department or your own fire department, whether you have your own security forces or whether you contract with the local jurisdiction. So you want to make sure to include all of those people in there and all those different agencies and resources on your org chart too. And it can get tricky when they're not necessarily all part of your organization or under your immediate control. You have to have more of a joint venture or a unified command structure to address that in those different response scenarios.
Great, thank you. They also added, they were curious if that includes other airports and cities that might also be infected, specifically as it relates to airports and how you might coordinate efforts with multi-jurisdictional in terms of multiple cities.
Have your exercises with your response partners. It's always a good way to meet people, to shake their hands, and to trade cell phone numbers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for this presentation. We hope to see all of you learners back next Wednesday, September 18th for our upcoming NIOSH Ergonomics webinar on the fatigue failure approach for ergonomic assessment research updates. And that'll be with Sean Gallagher, PhD and CPE. You can check out our website for more information and to register online, coeh.berkeley.edu. Thank you all for your wonderful questions and participation in today's webinar, and thank you again to our presenter. I hope you all have a wonderful day.